You say you want discipline, but the moment discomfort arrives, you negotiate with yourself like a lawyer defending a guilty client. Think about that honestly. Every morning you wake up with intentions. You tell yourself, today is different. You feel it, that brief window of clarity before the day touches you, before the phone lights up, before the noise begins. And in that window, you are convinced. You believe you are the kind of person who follows through. Then, resistance shows up. Not loudly. It never announces itself. It just whispers, 5 more minutes, start tomorrow, you've already had a hard week. And just like that, the version of you that was going to change everything folds. Quietly, without a fight. But here is what nobody tells you about that moment. The problem is not laziness. Lazy is too simple a word, and it lets you off too easy. What is actually happening in that moment is something far more unsettling. Your mind is protecting you from the very thing you need most. It has been doing this your entire life. It has learned, through years of small surrenders, that discomfort is a threat. And so, it treats discipline the same way it treats danger. Your own mind has been trained to work against you. This is where most people stop reading, because it is far more comfortable to blame circumstance, the job, the schedule, the environment, the people around you. Circumstance is external. Circumstance can be pointed at. But the Stoics understood something about this that modern life has buried completely. Epictetus, who was born a slave, a man who owned nothing, controlled nothing in the outside world, wrote that the only true possession a human being has is the capacity to choose their own response. Not their situation, their response. He was in chains, and he was freer than most people alive today. That should disturb you, because what it means is this. The cage most people live inside has no walls, no lock, no external force keeping them small. The cage is built entirely from untrained thinking, repeated daily, until it feels like reality. Discipline is not a habit, not a routine, not a morning checklist or a cold shower or a motivational phrase written on a mirror. Those things are costumes. Real discipline is a war fought entirely inside the mind. And most people have never even shown up to the battlefield. So the question is not whether you want to change. You do. Everyone does. The question is whether you are willing to face what is actually standing in the way. The ancient Zen teachers had a practice. When a student came to them asking how to master their mind, the teacher would not give them a method, would not hand them a system. Instead, they would ask the student to sit in silence, completely still, and do nothing. Most students lasted minutes, not because silence is painful, because what lives inside the silence is, the moment distraction is removed, the mind reveals itself for what it actually is. Restless, desperate, grabbing at anything to avoid being still, thoughts about the past, anxiety about the future, sudden urgent interest in things that did not matter 5 minutes ago. This is your mind without its costume on. And here is the insight that changes everything. You cannot discipline something you have never clearly seen. Most people are trying to control a mind they have never once sat still long enough to observe. They are fighting an enemy they have never looked at directly. So the first act of real discipline is not action. It is stillness. Brutal, uncomfortable, revealing stillness. Shi Hengyi, the Shaolin monk and philosopher, teaches that mastery of the self begins not with force, but with observation. You watch the mind. You notice how quickly it moves, how loudly it protests, how expertly it manufactures reasons to escape. And through that watching, not judging, not fighting, just watching, something begins to shift. The noise starts to lose its authority. But here is where modern life has constructed something almost perfectly designed to prevent this from ever happening. Every system around you, every notification, every feed, every piece of content engineered to hold attention for exactly long enough before offering the next thing exists to ensure you never have to sit with yourself. Not for a moment, not for a breath. This is not accidental. A mind that is constantly fed external stimulation never develops the muscle to generate its own stillness. And a mind without stillness cannot observe itself. And a mind that cannot observe itself cannot be disciplined. It can only be distracted, which is exactly what it has been, for years, possibly for your entire adult life. The Stoics called this the most dangerous form of poverty, not the absence of money or status, the absence of inner silence. Seneca wrote that a person who cannot be alone with their own thoughts is not free. They are a slave to whatever noise is nearest. Most people reading this are that slave right now, not because they are weak, because they were never shown what the alternative actually costs. They were sold a version of self-improvement that looks like productivity and feels like progress. More output, more optimization, more doing. But doing more with an undisciplined mind is just moving faster in the wrong direction. Real transformation does not begin with action. It begins with the willingness to stop, to remove the noise, to sit inside the discomfort of your own unguarded thinking and not run. That moment, that single choice to stay instead of escape, is where discipline is actually born. Not in the gym, not in the journal, not in the cold water, in the silence you have been avoiding. And most people will read this, feel the truth of it, and then pick up their phone. Silence will show you the first enemy, your own restless mind. But there is a second enemy. And this one is harder to defeat because it wears a human face. Other people, not through force, not through threat, through something far more sophisticated than either, through the slow, invisible pressure of their expectations. The way a room shifts when you make a choice nobody around you understands. The way people who claim to want the best for you become suddenly uncomfortable the moment you begin to actually change. Most people never achieve self-mastery, not because their own mind defeats them, but because they never learned to stop outsourcing their identity to the people around them. This is the trap nobody warns you about. From childhood, the mind is trained to scan the environment for approval. It learns early that belonging requires conformity, that being accepted means being predictable, that the people around you are most comfortable when you remain exactly who they decided you were 5 years ago. And so, without ever making a conscious decision, most people build their entire sense of self from the outside in, constructed almost entirely from other people's reactions, other people's comfort, other people's definitions of who they are allowed to become. Epictetus called this the deepest form of slavery. Not chains, not poverty, the compulsive need for other people's approval, because a person who requires validation from outside themselves has handed control of their inner life to whoever is nearest. Their mood depends on how they are received. Their confidence depends on whether they are praised. Their direction depends on whether the people around them agree with where they are going. That person is not free. That person is a mirror, reflecting back whatever the room expects to see. Zen philosophy addresses this with brutal simplicity. The teacher Huangpo wrote that as long as you seek the approval of others, you will never know your own mind, because your own mind will never be allowed to speak loudly enough to be heard over the noise of other people's opinions. Breaking this is not about becoming cold, not about isolation or indifference to the people you love. It is about one specific internal shift, moving the seat of authority from outside you to inside you, deciding, clearly and permanently, that the only judgment that carries real weight is the one you make about yourself in the moments nobody else can see. This is what the warrior traditions understood, that modern culture has completely inverted. Today, identity is performed outward, curated, presented, measured in other people's responses. The warrior traditions taught the opposite. Identity is built inward, in private, through actions taken when no reward is offered and no audience is watching. Who you are when nobody is looking. That is the only version of you that is real. And the moment you begin living from that version, something around you will change noticeably. Some people will become uncomfortable. Some will push back. Some will call it arrogance, coldness, selfishness. Because a person who no longer requires their approval is a person they can no longer influence. And that is genuinely threatening to people who have built their relationships on invisible control. Let them be uncomfortable. Marcus Aurelius faced this inside his own court, surrounded by people whose opinions carried political weight, whose approval could shift alliances, whose judgment could cost him everything. And still he wrote, privately, to himself, "Never esteem anything as of advantage to you that will make you break your word or lose your self-respect." He was telling himself what he already knew but needed to hear again, that the approval of the room is worth nothing if it costs you the approval of your own conscience. Nothing anyone outside you says about you is as loud as what you say to yourself in silence. The person who masters this becomes something most people find difficult to be around, not because they are harsh or arrogant, but because they are settled, completely, quietly, unmovably settled inside themselves. They do not need the conversation to go a certain way, do not need to be understood, validated, or agreed with. They have already done the only work that matters. They have become someone they themselves respect. And a person like that cannot be controlled, not by opinion, not by pressure, not by the slow erosion of 1,000 small social expectations, because you cannot manipulate a person who does not need anything from you. There is a cost to mastery that nobody who is selling you discipline will ever mention, because if they told you the real price, most of you would walk away, and they know that. So instead, they give you the version that feels achievable, the version with the clean aesthetics and the morning routine and the 90-day transformation, the version where discipline looks like control and control looks like peace. That version is a lie dressed in good lighting. What the ancient traditions actually taught, what Marcus Aurelius practiced privately while publicly carrying the weight of an empire, is that real self-mastery requires you to voluntarily enter suffering. Not avoid it, not manage it, enter it deliberately, repeatedly, until the part of you that fears discomfort begins to lose its grip. This is the teaching modern self-help skips entirely. Epictetus did not teach his students to optimize their mornings. He taught them to practice poverty, to deliberately eat less, sleep on hard surfaces, wear inadequate clothing in cold weather, not as punishment, as training. He understood something that comfort has made nearly impossible to understand today, that a person who has never voluntarily suffered cannot be trusted when suffering arrives uninvited. And it will arrive. It always does. The Stoics called this premeditatio malorum, the deliberate meditation on hardship. You do not wait for difficulty to find you. You practice sitting inside it before it comes, so that when it does, your mind does not shatter. It stands. But here is the deeper truth underneath that practice. Voluntary suffering is not about toughness for its own sake. It is about one specific thing, teaching the mind that it can survive what it fears most. Because the prison most people live in is not built from real danger. It is built from anticipated danger, from the imagined pain of things that have not happened yet. The mind projects discomfort forward in time and then makes decisions today based on a future it invented. You have cancelled things you needed to do because of how you imagined they would feel. You have stayed small because the version of difficulty your mind constructed was more powerful than the actual difficulty would ever be. Zen Buddhism calls this the second arrow. The first arrow is real pain, unavoidable, human, honest. The second arrow is everything the mind adds afterward. The resistance, the narrative, the suffering about the suffering. And according to the teachers, it is almost always the second arrow that does the real damage. Real discipline is learning to pull out the second arrow. This means catching the mind in the act of manufacturing reasons to retreat, watching it build its case, its very convincing, very detailed, very emotionally persuasive case, for why now is not the right time, why you are not ready, why the conditions need to be better before you begin, and then doing the thing anyway, not with force. Not with gritted teeth and white-knuckled willpower, because willpower is a resource and it runs out. With something quieter and far more durable. With the calm understanding that discomfort is not a signal to stop. It is proof that you are moving towards something real. Every tradition that has ever produced genuinely disciplined human beings, Stoic, Zen, warrior, monastic, agrees on this one point. The body will resist, the mind will negotiate, and the person who learns to observe that resistance without obeying it becomes something most people never experience in their entire lives. Ungovernable. Not by circumstance, not by other people, not by fear, not by the slow, comfortable pull of a life built entirely around avoiding what is hard, but getting there requires something most people have never been asked to give. Here is the truth you have been waiting for, and it is going to be harder to hear than anything that came before it. You already know everything you need to know. That is not encouragement. That is the most devastating thing that can be said to a person who has spent years consuming wisdom without changing. Because it means the gap between who you are and who you could be is not a knowledge problem. It never was. You have read the quotes, heard the teachings, felt the truth of them land somewhere real inside you, and then watched yourself return, quietly and completely, to exactly who you were before. This is the final wall, and most people never get past it. The Zen teachers called it the knowing-doing gap. Marcus Aurelius wrote about it in his private journals, not as a philosophical concept, but as a personal confession. The man who wrote some of the most disciplined thinking in human history struggled, daily, to close the distance between what he knew and what he actually did. He was not writing the meditations as a finished man. He was writing them as a man still in the fight, talking himself back to his own principles every single morning. That should change how you see discipline entirely. It is not a destination. There is no version of this where you arrive. No morning you wake up and the work is finished. The mind is conquered. The battle is done. The monks who have practiced for decades will tell you the same thing. The practice does not end. The mind does not surrender permanently. Every day, it returns with the same negotiations, the same whispers, the same carefully constructed reasons to choose comfort over growth. What changes is your relationship to that voice. The undisciplined person hears the voice and obeys it. The partially disciplined person hears it and fights it, which is exhausting, and why willpower always eventually fails. But the person who has done the real work, the deep, uncomfortable, patient work, hears the voice and simply does not believe it anymore. Not because the voice stops, because they have sat inside enough discomfort to know the voice is always wrong about what you can survive. This is what Shi Heng Yi means when he speaks about the 5 hindrances: desire, aversion, restlessness, sluggishness, and doubt. He does not teach students to destroy these forces. He teaches them to recognize these forces as weather, weather that passes, weather that has no authority over the mountain unless the mountain decides to move. You are not the weather, you are the mountain, but only if you choose to be. And that choice is not made once. It is made every single morning, in the small moment before habit takes over, in the breath between stimulus and response, in the gap that Epictetus spent his entire life pointing at, the only territory that truly belongs to you. Everything outside that gap is noise. Other people's opinions, noise. Past failures, noise. The version of the future your fear has invented, noise. The only thing that is real is the choice available to you right now, in this moment, about who you are going to be in the next 60 seconds. Most people spend their entire lives letting that moment pass unconsciously. The person who learns to catch it, to stand inside it, to make a deliberate choice rather than a reactive one, that person becomes something the ancient traditions all have a word for, even if the words differ across cultures. The Stoics called it the sage. The Zen tradition calls it the awakened mind. The warrior traditions simply call it mastery. None of them describe it as happiness. None of them promise it feels good. They describe it as something far more valuable than happiness. They call it freedom. The specific, unshakable freedom of a person who knows that nothing outside them has the power to determine what happens inside them. That freedom is not given. It is not found. It is not stumbled into through the right morning routine or the right book or the right moment of inspiration. It is built, slowly, painfully, through thousands of small moments where you chose the hard thing when the easy thing was right there. Through the silence you sat inside when every nerve told you to reach for distraction. Through the discomfort you entered voluntarily until your mind finally understood. This will not break me. The path forward is not more information. You have enough. The path forward is the next moment of discomfort you do not run from. Then the one after that. Then the one after that. Until one day, without fanfare, without announcement, you realize the voice that used to govern your entire life has become something you simply observe, like weather passing over a mountain that has decided it is not going anywhere. That is the work, all of it. There is nothing else. And it starts not tomorrow, not after the conditions improve, not when you feel ready, because you will never feel ready. It starts in the next 60 seconds, with the simplest and most radical act available to a human being, choosing not to run. If this reached something real in you, if somewhere in these words you recognize the exact war being described, then you already know you need more of this. Because this is the only kind of content worth your attention, the kind that tells you what you do not want to hear, delivered with enough honesty to actually change something. The next teaching is already waiting.